On the morning, Keneilwe came home from the hospital still weak, still hoping her husband handed her a folded sheet of paper instead of a glass of water. It was a divorce. He left a dying woman to save the cost of saving her. But 4 days later, that same woman would inherit a fortune so vast that the man who threw her away would one day beg at her gate. If you love emotional stories filled with betrayal family drama, shocking secrets, and the sweet, quiet taste of justice, then you are in the right place. So sit back, get comfortable, grab something warm to drink, and let this story carry you. Before we begin, comment which country you're watching from and your local time right now. Let us step into Lagos, where one act of cruelty was about to meet one quiet act of grace. The flat in Surulere was small enough that you could stand in its center and touch the worry in every corner. 2 rooms, a kitchen that doubled as a passage and a single window that let in more noise than light. Yet, for 7 years, Keneilwe had made it feel like more than it was. She painted the cracked wall a soft yellow with money she saved from sewing. She kept a row of dried herbs on the sill. She greeted the morning the way some people greet an old friend, even on the days her heart fluttered in her chest like a bird trapped behind glass. That heart was the trouble. The doctors at the general hospital had a long name for it, but Keneilwe had her own. She called it her stubborn heart because it kept beating long after it had every reason to rest. The surgery she needed could not be done in Lagos. It needed a hospital across the sea and money the Okafor family did not have or pretended not to have. So she lived carefully, measuring her days the way a poor woman measures rice, never sure if there would be enough. Emeka had not always been cold. When she married him, he was a young man with ambition burning bright behind his eyes, a man who talked through the night about the businesses he would build, the houses they would own, the children who would carry his name. She had loved that fire in him. She did not yet understand that fire left to itself will eventually burn the people standing closest to it. The change came slowly the way rust comes to iron. First, it was the sighing when she returned from the clinic with another bill. Then, it was the way he stopped looking at her when she spoke about her treatment, as if her illness were a debt she had run up behind his back. By the 7th year, he had a particular silence he wore at home, heavy and accusing, and Keneilwe had learned to move quietly inside it. What Emeka resented most strangely was not the hospital, it was the old man. Everyone in the neighborhood knew Baba Tunde, and almost no one truly saw him. He lived at the dead end of their street in a leaning shack of rusted zinc and old wood, a frail man with hands like dried roots and a voice softened by age. People said he had no children, no money, no one. Children sometimes threw stones at his door for sport. Grown men stepped around him on the road as though poverty were a sickness they might catch. To most of Surulere Baba Tunde was furniture the kind you walked past without seeing, but Keneilwe saw him. It had started 2 years earlier on a day when she found him collapsed near the gutter, too weak to rise. No one else stopped. She knelt in her good wrapper, lifted him with arms that trembled from her own weakness, and walked him home. After that, it simply became part of who she was. Every few days, she carried him a covered plate, a little jollof, when she could afford rice, plain yam, and palm oil when she could not. She brought him the cheap blood pressure tablets the chemist sold, and she sat with him while he ate, listening to his slow stories about a Lagos that no longer existed. "You feed me when you yourself are hungry," he said to her once, watching her with eyes that were sharper than his frail body suggested. Why? Keneilwe had only smiled and tucked the cloth tighter around his shoulders. Because hunger does not knock before it enters Baba. Today it visits your house. Tomorrow it may visit mine. We should be kind while we still can. The old man had gone very quiet then. "The world measures you by what you own," he murmured almost to himself. Heaven measures you by what you give. She did not know why those words stayed with her. She carried them home the way you carry a small stone in your pocket, forgetting it is there until your fingers brush it again. Emeka, of course, called it foolishness. "You spend our food on a useless old beggar," he snapped, one evening finding her wrapping a plate. "A man who will be dead by next rain. Meanwhile, your medicine, your hospital, your endless bills, and you give our rice to a stranger." He laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "When you are dying, will that old goat carry you to the grave?" Keneilwe had looked at him for a long moment. "I will not become what hurt me," she said softly, and went out into the dusk with the plate balanced on her palm. She did not see the way Emeka watched her go. She did not see how lately he had begun coming home, late, smelling of perfume that was not hers, nor how his phone now lived face down on the table, nor how a certain restless calculation had entered his eyes whenever he looked at her, as though she were a sum he was trying to subtract from his life. That night, long after Keneilwe had taken her tablets and lain down with one hand pressed over her stubborn heart, Emeka sat alone at the small table. From inside his jacket he drew a folder plain and brown, the kind clerks sold for a few naira at any roadside stall. He opened it under the dim bulb and read what was inside his jaw, tightening, his thumb moving slowly down the page. When he heard her stir, he shut the folder at once and slid it deep beneath a stack of old newspapers as though hiding a knife. "Emeka," she called sleepily from the inner room, "you are not coming to bed." "Soon," he said. His voice was perfectly level. "I am only thinking." But he did not come to bed soon, and he was not only thinking. He sat in the yellow light she had painted with her own hands in the home she had built out of almost nothing, and he made his quiet arithmetic of how much a wife was worth, and how much one could save by being rid of her. And at the end of the street behind a leaning door, a frail old man, who was not at all what he seemed, lay awake, too, listening to the night waiting. The bills came like rain in July, one after another, until they pooled into something that could drown a family. Keneilwe kept them in a biscuit tin, folded small, as if making them smaller might make them mean less. There was the cardiologist's fee. The cost of the scan they repeated every 3 months. The tablets she took morning and night, white ones, and a bitter pink one, the pink one alone costing more than a week of food. And beneath all of it, like a deep well with no bottom, the surgery itself, the one that lived across the sea in a hospital whose name she had memorized but never spoken aloud because to say it felt like asking for too much. Emeka had stopped pretending to help. When the landlord came for rent, he found reasons to be elsewhere. When the chemist sent word that her medicine was finished, he developed a sudden deafness. The money he earned from his small dealings in electronics money that had once gone toward their shared dreams now went toward shoes Keneilwe never saw him wear at home, and recharge cards for a phone he guarded like a secret. "You look at me as though I owe you something," he told her one morning, knotting his tie before a mirror she had bought. "I did not make you sick, Keneilwe. Remember that. I did not make you sick." She said nothing. She had learned that her silence cost her less than her words did. What she did not stop doing, no matter how thin the rice grew, was carry the plate to the end of the street. Baba Tunde was weaker now. The cough that lived in his chest had deepened, and some days he could not rise to open his own door. So she let herself in and found him on the low cot, his breath whistling. She would prop him up, feed him slowly, wipe his brow with the corner of her wrapper. He spoke less, but his eyes followed her with a strange, steady attention, like a man studying something he had searched for a long time and finally found. "Why do you not leave him?" he asked her one evening, his voice barely above the hum of the kerosene lamp. He had heard somehow the things that happened in her flat. Everyone on the street heard. Keneilwe smoothed the thin blanket over his legs. "Where would a sick woman with empty pockets go, Baba?" She tried to make it light. Besides, a marriage is not a coat you remove when the weather changes. No, the old man agreed softly. But some people will remove you when they decide the weather has changed. He closed his eyes. Listen to me, my daughter. The day will come when you stand with nothing in your hands. On that day, remember that empty hands are easier to fill than greedy ones. She thought he was only an old man speaking in the riddles old men love. She kissed his forehead, left the lamp turned low so he would not wake in darkness, and went home to a husband who did not ask where she had been. But here is what Keneilwe did not see, and what you watching now are about to. Long after she had gone, when the street had emptied and the dogs had curled into the warm dust, a car came to the dead end of that road. Not a Danfo, not a rattling taxi, but a black SUV polished to a mirror, shine its engine so quiet it seemed to glide rather than drive. It stopped a respectful distance from the leaning shack, and a man stepped out tall and crisp in a dark suit despite the late hour. This was Mr. Bello. He did not knock as a stranger knocks. He pushed the door gently, stepped inside the hovel, as if it were a palace, and bowed his head. "Chairman," he said. "Good evening, sir." The frail old man on the cot opened his eyes, and something in them had changed. The vagueness was gone. What remained was clear, cool, and commanding the gaze of a man who had once moved markets with a single phone call. "You are late, Bello," said Chief Tunde Adeyemi, and even his voice had shed its tremble. "Forgive me, sir, the traffic on the mainland." Mr. Bello set down a leather case and drew out papers, a fountain pen, a single bottle of medicine that cost more than everything in the shack combined. "The doctors say you should be at the estate, sir, not here, not like this." "The estate is full of people who love my money," the old man said. "This street is the only place anyone has loved me." He let out a slow breath. "How long do they give me now?" Mr. Bello's jaw worked. "Weeks, sir, perhaps less." The chairman nodded as though they were discussing the weather. "Then we have little time and much to arrange." He lifted one root-like hand and pointed at the papers. "The will. Is it done as I instructed, every word?" "Every word, sir." Mr. Bello hesitated the way a loyal man hesitates before a thing he does not understand. "Sir, forgive me, but the lawyers, the family, the board, they will ask questions. A market woman who feeds you yam. They will say you were not in your right mind. They will fight it. Let them fight." The old man's mouth curved. "I have watched my own blood circle me like vultures for 40 years, Bello, smelling my death before I was even sick. And then a sick woman with nothing carries me out of a gutter and feeds me with food taken from her own mouth, asking for nothing. Nothing." He pressed the pen into his aide's hand. "I have spent my whole life among people who measure others by what they own. I wanted, before I die, to find one soul who measures by what they give. I found her at the end of this road." He signed. The pen scratched in the silence like the turning of a great, slow wheel. "Tell no one yet," the chairman said, sinking back suddenly small again. "Especially not her. Let the world go on thinking she is nothing. Then, when the time comes, we will let them all see exactly what nothing is worth." Mr. Bello bowed, gathered the papers, and slipped into the night. The black SUV glided away, and at the other end of Surulere, Keneilwe slept beside a man who at that very moment was hiding a brown folder of his own. The Okafor family gathered on the last Sunday of every month at Mama Nkichi's house in the village of Umuocha, a half-day's journey from Lagos. It was a tradition the old woman guarded fiercely, less out of love than out of a need to be seen at the head of her own table, ladling judgment along with the soup. Keneilwe had learned to dread those Sundays the way one dreads a tooth that has begun to ache. This Sunday she was weaker than usual. The journey in the cramped Danfo had left her chest tight, and she sat near the window of the family parlor with one hand resting quietly over her heart, willing it to behave. The room was loud with relatives, with the smell of egusi and pounded yam, with children chasing one another between the plastic chairs. Auntie Ifeoma Emeka's elder sister gave Keneilwe a small, uncertain smile from across the room, but said nothing. Auntie Ifeoma rarely said anything when their mother held court, and hold court Mama Nkechi did. "My son," she announced loud enough for every ear, "you are looking thin. A man should not look thin when he has a wife. A wife is supposed to feed her husband, to build him, to give him sons." She let the word sons fall like a stone into still water, and every head turned as she intended towards Keneilwe. "Mama," Emeka muttered, but it was a weak muttering, the kind that invites more rather than ending it. "What am I lying?" Mama Nkechi spread her hands. 7 years this girl has been in my son's house. 7 years. Where are my grandchildren instead? What does my son have? Hospital bills, chemist bills, a wife who cannot even climb the stairs without resting. She turned her gaze full upon Keneilwe, and it was not unkind so much as it was final, the look a trader gives goods she has decided not to buy. "We did not marry a wife. We married a patient." A few of the relatives laughed, not all, but enough. Keneilwe felt the heat climb her neck. She kept her eyes on her folded hands. She had promised herself long ago that she would not weep in this house, because tears in this house were treated as a confession of guilt. "Mama, that is enough," came a quiet voice. It was Auntie Ifeoma, half rising from her chair, her face pained. "She is not well. Today is not the day for—" "Sit down, Ifeoma." Mama Nkechi did not even look at her daughter. "You, who also have nothing to show, sit." And Auntie Ifeoma sat, her courage folding like wet paper, and the small flame of defense she had lit went out before it could warm anyone. She lowered her eyes ashamed, and Keneilwe understood that the woman was not cruel, only afraid, and that fear in a person is a heavy thing to forgive, but an easy thing to recognize. "You spend everything on her sickness," Mama Nkechi went on, returning to her son. "And what is left? Nothing. A man your age should be building, buying land, driving a car that announces him before he arrives. Instead, you are pouring your future into a hole that has no bottom." She clucked her tongue. "There are women, Emeka, who would multiply a man, not subtract from him." It was at that precise moment, as if summoned by the word women, that the door opened and Adaiza walked in. She did not so much enter as arrive the way weather arrives. She was dressed in a way that did not belong to Umuocha at all. A tailored dress, the color of deep wine gold at her ears, and wrist sunglasses pushed up into hair that had been done in a salon Keneilwe could never afford to stand inside. She carried a small designer bag against her hip like a trophy, and when she smiled it was at everyone and no one. "Mama Nkechi," she sang, embracing the old woman as though they were long acquainted. "I hope I am not too late. The road from Lagos, terrible." My daughter, you are right on time," Mama Nkechi cooed, and the warmth that flooded her voice was a thing Keneilwe had never once heard directed at herself. "Everyone, this is a daisy. Her father, you know, is the investor, the one with the property on the island. A serious family, a family that knows the value of things." Adaiza let her gaze travel the room, gracious and slow, until it landed on Keneilwe by the window, and there it stopped. She took in the modest wrapper, the tired face, the hand resting over the heart, and something flickered behind her perfect smile, something that was not pity and was not respect. "And this is," Daisy asked, though her tone said she had already decided the answer did not matter. "That is Emeka's wife," Mama Nkechi said, and even she had the grace, or perhaps the strategy, to drop her voice a little. For now. The two small words hung in the air. Keneilwe lifted her eyes and met Daisy's, and the younger woman did not look away. Instead, she smiled wider the way a cat smiles at a bird behind glass, and crossed the room to settle herself uninvited into the chair beside Emeka, beside her husband. Keneilwe rose. Her legs were unsteady, but her voice when it came was even. "Please excuse me. I need a little air." No one stopped her. She made her way out to the back of the compound past the cooking fires to the low wall where the goats were tied, and there she stood with both hands pressed flat against the rough cement, breathing slowly, ordering her heart to be still. It was then, through the open louvers of the parlor window, that she heard them. Emeka's voice, lower now, meant only for a daisy, and a daisy's laugh soft and indulgent. "You are too patient," a daisy was saying. "A man like you carrying a burden like that. Any sensible man would have set it down long ago." And Emeka, the man Keneilwe had loved through 7 years of yellow paint and dried herbs and stubborn hope, did not disagree. He did not defend her. He only sighed the long sigh of a man releasing something and said, "Soon. These things must be done carefully, but soon." Keneilwe stood very still against the wall, the evening cool on her face, and felt something inside her go quiet. Not broken. Quiet. The way a house goes quiet when its last guest has finally decided to leave. In the weeks that followed, 2 plans moved quietly through Sorolere, like 2 rivers running beneath the same ground, and neither knew of the other. The first belonged to Emeka. He had grown careful now, almost gentle in the way a hunter grows gentle as he closes the final distance. He stopped sighing at the bills. He even, on one occasion, brought home a small wrap of suya and set it before Keneilwe as though it were an apology. She thanked him quietly and ate, and did not let her face show that she had heard him through a louvered window promise another woman that he would soon set his wife down like a load. What she could not see was the brown folder which now lived in a locked drawer at the electronics shop. Inside it were divorce papers drawn up by a cheap lawyer Emeka had found near the courthouse, a man who asked no questions and charged accordingly. Emeka had read them so many times he knew the cruelest lines by heart. Irreconcilable differences. He had laughed at that, as if a heart that refused to die quietly were a difference one could reconcile. His arithmetic was simple, and it was monstrous. The surgery across the sea would cost more than he could earn in 5 years. The medicine bled him monthly, and there, waiting, was a daisy, whose father everyone said owned property on the island, whose family knew the value of things. Marry the sick woman's poverty, or marry the rich man's daughter. To Emeka, it was not even a choice. It was a correction. A man simply trading a losing position for a winning one, the way he traded faulty phones for working ones at his shop. You must do it cleanly. Adeza instructed him, the 2 of them parked in her car on a side street where no one knew them. No drama, no church people taking her side. Just hand her the paper and be done. And the flat is yours, not hers, so she leaves with what she came with. Nothing. She studied her nails. A man cannot rise carrying a corpse on his back, Emeka, even one that is still breathing. He should have flinched at that. He did not. The second plan belonged to the old man at the end of the road, and it wore the disguise of weakness. One evening, Keneilwe came with her plate to find Babatunde sitting up. His breathing labored, his hands twisting the edge of the blanket with what looked like distress. "My daughter," he said, and his voice trembled. "I am in trouble. A man I owed money long ago has found me. He says if I do not bring him 8,000 naira by tomorrow, he will take the little I have, even the roof over this head." He looked at her with watery, frightened eyes. "I have no one. I have only you. 8,000 naira. Keneilwe felt the number land in her chest. It was almost exactly the cost of her pink tablets for the month, the bitter ones, that kept her heart from racing into danger. She had set the money aside that very morning, folded into the biscuit tin, counted twice. Without it, she would have to do without the medicine until she could find more, and doing without was not a small thing. Doing without was the kind of thing that sent women like her back to the general hospital in the dead of night. She did not hesitate for as long as you might think. She went home, took the folded notes from the tin and brought them back, pressing them into his dry hands. "Here, Baba, take it. Pay the man. We will not let anyone take your roof." The old man stared at the money, then at her. "But this is your medicine," he said softly. He had not expected perhaps that she would know it and give it anyway. "I have heard the chemist. This is the very money for your heart. My heart has carried me this far on stubbornness alone," Keneilwe said, and managed a smile. "It can be stubborn one more month, but a man with no roof has nothing to be stubborn for." She folded his fingers closed over the notes. "The world will measure us by what we keep, Baba, but we will measure ourselves by what we give. You taught me that." For a long moment the old man could not speak. When he finally did, his voice had changed, deepened, steadied, as though the trembling had only ever been a costume he wore and had grown too tired to keep wearing. "Keneilwe," he said, and it was the first time he had ever spoken her full name slowly, like a thing of value. "There are men who own half of Lagos who would not give a stranger the dust from their shoes. And here you are giving me your very heartbeat." He shook his head. "Go home, rest. And know this, whatever the days bring, however dark, you will not be left in the gutter. You pulled an old man out of one. The same hand reaches for you." She thought it only the gratitude of a lonely man. She kissed his forehead, told him to sleep, and went home with an empty tin and a full conscience. She did not see the figure standing in the deeper shadows across the road. Mr. Bello had come that evening with the chairman's medicine and had waited outside unwilling to interrupt. He had heard it all through the thin walls, every word. He had watched the sick woman give away the money for her own heart to a man she believed was poor. And then walking home he had passed the lit window of a certain electronics shop where Emeka Okafor sat late, a brown folder open before him, signing his name with the easy confidence of a man who believed he was cutting away dead weight. Mr. Bello stood in the street a long while looking from one lit window to the other. The poor woman who gave everything. The husband who would soon give her nothing. Then he took out his phone and made a call. "Sir," he said quietly when it answered. "It is happening. The husband, he has prepared papers. I have seen them with my own eyes. He means to put her out very soon." There was a pause on the line. When the chairman spoke, his voice was calm, almost satisfied, the voice of a man watching the last piece of a long game slide into place. "Good," said Chief Tunde Adeyemi. Let him do exactly what is in his heart. A man should always be allowed to show the world who he truly is." A slow breath. "And when he has shown them, then, we will show them who she is." It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of gray Lagos morning that cannot decide whether to rain. Keneilwe had spent the previous night at the general hospital. Her heart had raced in the small hours the way the doctors had warned it might, once she stopped the pink tablets and a kind neighbor, Mama Grace, from the provisions stall had bundled her into a taxi and sat with her until the worst passed. By dawn, the racing had quieted to a deep, bruised tiredness, and they sent her home with instructions to rest and a fresh warning she had no money to obey. Mama Grace walked her to the gate of the compound, pressed a sachet of water into her hand, and squeezed her shoulder. "Rest, my sister. God is not asleep." Keneilwe climbed the stairs slowly, one hand on the rail, and pushed open the door of the flat she had painted yellow. Emeka was waiting. So, she saw at once, was an audience. He was not alone. Mama Nkechi sat in the good chair, her wrapper arranged, just so her face composed into the satisfied stillness of a woman who has traveled from the village specifically to witness something. And in the doorway, half in and half out, As though she could not be bothered to fully arrive, stood Adizi, sunglasses pushed up, scrolling her phone present only to enjoy. On the small table where Keneilwe's herbs had once dried on the sill above it lay the brown folder. "You are back," Emeka said. He did not ask how she was. He did not look at the gray hospital tag still wrapped around her wrist. "Sit down. We need to talk, and my mother is here as witness, so there will be no confusion later." Keneilwe did not sit. She stood very still in the center of the room, she had built her hand drifting out of a long habit to rest over her heart. "Talk," she said. He opened the folder. He had practiced this, she could tell by the smoothness of it. "Keneilwe, this marriage has not worked. We both know it. 7 years, no children. Endless sickness. I have tried." He spread his hands as if displaying the great labor of his trying. But a man cannot pour water into a basket forever. These are divorce papers. I have signed. You will sign, and you will go in peace, and we will both be free. For a moment, the only sound was Adiza's nail tapping her phone screen. "In peace," Keneilwe repeated softly. "In peace," Mama Nkechi cut in, leaning forward. "Better than you deserve. You came into this family with nothing. No land, no proper people, no womb that works. You leave with nothing. That is fair. That is more than fair." She flicked her fingers toward the corner, and Keneilwe saw then what she had not noticed at first, a single bag. A Ghana must go, that great striped plastic carrier the poor used to move their whole lives at once, already packed at zip, half-broken, sitting on the floor like a sentence already passed. "My son was generous to even pack for you," the old woman said. "Take it and go. Do not make noise. The neighbors are watching, and we are respectable people." The neighbors were watching. Word traveled through a Lagos compound faster than fire, and already faces had gathered at windows and along the open corridor drawn by the particular silence that precedes a scandal. Mama Grace was among them, her hand pressed to her mouth. Children peered between the legs of adults. This was the public part, the part Adizi had insisted on without saying so, because a thing done before witnesses cannot easily be undone, and a woman shamed before her neighbors rarely finds the strength to fight. Keneilwe looked at the paper. She looked at the broken zipped bag that held 7 years of her life. She looked at the man she had nursed and fed and forgiven, and at his mother who had never once called her daughter, and at the glittering stranger in the doorway who would sleep tonight in the bed Keneilwe had painted the wall yellow for. And then she did the thing none of them expected. She picked up the pen and she signed. She signed cleanly without trembling in the same neat hand she used to label her dried herbs. "There," she said, setting the pen down. "You are free." She did not weep. She did not beg. She walked to the corner, lifted the heavy striped bag and felt her heart lurch under the weight of it, but she did not set it down. "That is all." Mama Nkechi seemed almost disappointed, as though she had armed herself for a battle that had not come. "No crying, no begging." Keneilwe turned at the door. She looked at them for what she believed was the last time, and when she spoke her voice carried clear into the corridor where the neighbors stood. "I came into this house with a working heart and an honest one," she said. "Today I leave with a heart that is tired but still honest. You have taken everything you can see. You could not touch the rest." She let her gaze rest on Emeka, and there was no hatred in it, only a terrible, quiet pity. "I will not become what hurt me, Emeka. I pray for your sake that one day you can say the same." Then she stepped out past the gawking faces, past Mama Grace, who reached for her hand, and missed past the children, and down the stairs she had so often climbed with her hand on the rail. No one followed. Behind her she heard Adizi laugh light and bright, and Mama Nkechi's voice rising to order the neighbors back to their business. She walked. She did not know where. The bag dragged at her arm, the sky could not decide to rain, and her heart beat its stubborn, bruised rhythm. At the corner, where the street met the main road, she finally stopped at the bus stop, set the bag down on the cracked pavement, and lowered herself onto the edge of it, breathing, gathering what strength she had left to decide which direction a woman with nothing should go. She had been sitting only a few minutes when a shadow slid over her. A black SUV had pulled to the curb, silent and gleaming wildly out of place against the rusted Danfoss and Hawkers. A rear window hummed down. Then the driver's door opened, and a tall man in a dark suit stepped out, came around, and stopped before her. He looked down at the sick woman on the broken bag with an expression she could not read, something that was almost reverence. He bowed his head. "Madame Keneilwe," said Mr. Bello. "I am sorry to find you like this. The chairman has been asking for you, please." He opened the rear door wide. "He does not have much time, and there is a great deal he needs you to know." Keneilwe did not get into the car at first. A lifetime of being poor teaches a woman to fear gifts that come too easily, and a gleaming SUV pulling up to a sick stranger on a broken bag did not feel like mercy. It felt like the beginning of a story that ends badly for women like her. "The chairman," she said slowly. "I know no chairman, sir. You have the wrong woman." Mr. Bello's face did not change. "You know him, madam. You have known him 2 years. You carried him out of a gutter when no one else would touch him. You have fed him with food taken from your own mouth." He paused. "Today you gave him 8,000 naira, the money for your own heart, because he told you a man was coming for his roof." Keneilwe went very still. "Baba Tunde," she breathed. "His name is Chief Tunde Adeyemi," said Mr. Bello, and let that name settle. "And there was never any man coming for his roof. He owns the roof. He owns a great many roofs. He only wanted to see one last time what kind of person you truly were when you believed there was nothing to gain." His voice gentled. "He is dying, madam. He has been asking for you all morning. Please, come." She came. The car did not take her to a hovel. It carried her out of Surulere, across the bridges into Lekki, through a gate that opened before they reached it, up a long drive lined with palms, to a house that was not a house but a kind of quiet palace, all pale stone and tall windows, and a stillness that money buys. Nurses moved softly. A doctor murmured in a corner, and in a wide bed propped against white pillows, smaller and frailer than ever, against so much grandeur, lay the old man she had fed yam and palm oil at the end of a dead-end street. "You came," Chief Adeyemi said, and smiled, and for a moment he was only Baba again. "I was afraid the husband had broken you so badly you would have no strength left to come." Keneilwe crossed the room and took his dry hand in both of hers, the way she always had. "Baba, all this time, you let me feed you. You let me give you my medicine money. And you had all of this." "I had all of this," he agreed, "and not one person in it who would have knelt in a gutter for me." His grip tightened, surprising in its strength. "Do you know how many people have smiled at me for 40 years, Keneilwe? Thousands. And every single smile had its hand out behind its back. My own family, my own blood. They circle me even now in the next rooms counting." He coughed, and a nurse stepped forward, and he waved her away. "And then a woman with a dying heart and an empty tin gives me everything and asks for nothing. Not once, not even today, sitting on a broken bag with the whole world taken from her. I did not give to be repaid, Baba." "I know," his eyes shone. "That is precisely why you will be." He turned his head to Mr. Bello. "It is all arranged. Every word, sir." "Then I can go." The old man looked back at Keneilwe, and the command had left his voice entirely. What remained was only tenderness. "Listen to me, my daughter, because I do not think I will speak many more times. The world measures you by what you own. Remember, But heaven measures you by what you give. You have given more than the rich men I have known gave in their whole lives. So heaven and a foolish old man have decided that you will never again sit on a broken bag at the side of any road." He drew a slow, rattling breath. "Whatever they say of me after I am gone, that I was mad, that you tricked me, that it cannot be true, you hold your head up. You earned this in a gutter, not a bedroom. You earned it with soup, not with lies." She did not understand all of it. She thought he was speaking of small things, a little money, perhaps a kindness returned. She pressed his hand to her cheek and wept, not for any inheritance but for the friend she was losing. "Do not talk of going, Baba. Stay, let me feed you again tomorrow." He smiled at that and closed his eyes, and his breathing slowed into something peaceful. "Tomorrow," he murmured. "Yes. Feed the poor ones at Keneilwe. Promise me. Feed the ones the world walks past." His hand relaxed in hers. "There are so many at the ends of so many roads." Those were the last words Chief Tunde Adeyemi ever spoke. Sometime in the gray hour before the next dawn, with the sick woman he had chosen, still holding his hand, and a houseful of relatives sleeping greedily down the hall, the old man let go. Far across the city the world went on as if nothing had shifted. In a noisy beer parlor in Surulere, Emeka, Okafor was buying around for men who only liked him when he paid. "Free at last," he announced, raising his bottle loud and bright. 7 years I carried that burden. 7 years of bill sickness, hospital, hospital, hospital. Do you know what I have saved already just by signing one paper of fortune? A fortune, my friends." The men laughed and drank his beer. "And now," he went on, lowering his voice into a smug grin, "now I marry a real woman. A serious family, property on the island. Daisy and I, we do the introduction next week. Small wedding, big future. A man must know when to cut his losses." He clinked his bottle against another. He did not feel the floor of his life quietly opening beneath him. He did not know that at that very hour the only door that had ever led to real wealth had closed forever with his name written nowhere behind it. Back in Lekki, Keneilwe sat beside the cooling hand of her friend until the nurses gently led her away. Numb, hollowed, she let Mr. Bello settle her into a quiet room and bring her tea she could not drink. It was there near morning that he came and stood before her and bowed his head the way he had bowed it at the bus stop. "Madam," he said quietly, "I know your grief is fresh and I am sorry, but there is something the chairman arranged, something he wanted you to hear only after he was gone." He drew a long breath. "In 3 days, his will is to be read. His family will be there, his lawyers, his company board." He met her eyes. "And he has instructed that nothing can be read, nothing at all, until you are seated in the room, because, Madam Keneilwe, the will is about you." Kethuk Fan 7, 1.1972. You said Tieptuk you Kauviadu, 1000 to 1200, to Theo Kui Din Kong Duok Nam Goai, a Koang Nai Tiep Tuk you Ko Viet Du, 1000 to 1200 to Theo Kwa Din Kong Duok Nam Goai Koang, Nay. 11 a.m. Claude responded. Fan 8. Orchestrated climactic reveal scene with inheritance twist and character revelations. Orchestrated climactic reveal scene with inheritance twist and character revelations. Fan 8. The will was read on a Friday in the long boardroom of Adeyemi Holdings, a building of glass and steel that stood over Lagos like a quiet monument to one man's lifetime of work. Keneilwe had never in her life entered such a place. She arrived in a simple black dress Mr. Bello's people had brought her grief still raw, and when the great glass doors parted for her, she half expected someone to take her by the arm and lead her back out to where people like her belonged. Instead, the staff bowed, The boardroom was already full when she entered, and the air in it was thick with a particular kind of waiting. Down both sides of the long table sat the Adeyemi family, the blood relatives the old man had spoken of, men in expensive agbada, and women heavy with gold, all of them wearing the careful mourning of people who have come less to grieve than to collect. At the head sat a panel of lawyers in dark suits, papers squared before them, and against the walls stood the company, bored gray and serious men who between them steered ships and built towers. Every head turned when Keneilwe walked in, and a ripple of confusion moved through the room. Who was this thin, tired woman in the plain dress? A maid. A nurse who had wandered into the wrong room. That is the woman, someone whispered. The one from the slum. The one Bello brought. What is she doing here? The senior lawyer, a calm man named Barrister Okonjo, rose and gestured to the empty chair at his right hand, the chair beside the very head of the table. "Madame Keneilwe," he said, his voice carrying. The chairman left strict instruction. "Please be seated here." The room rustled with outrage barely held in check. A heavy man near the front, the old man's nephew by the look of him, half rose. "This is a family matter. Why is a stranger sitting in my uncle's chair? Read the will and let us go home." The chairman anticipated your impatience, Barrister Okonjo said dryly, and lifted the document. "So I will not keep you waiting." He cleared his throat, and the room fell into a silence so complete you could hear the air conditioning breathe. "This is the last will and testament of Chief Tunde Adeyemi of sound mind, witnessed and notarized." He read the small bequests, first sums to long-serving staff, to a church to Mr. Bello, who bowed his head. The relatives shifted, hungry, waiting for the great rivers of money to be turned toward them. Then the barrister paused and looked up directly at Keneilwe. "And now the principal estate," he said. I read the chairman's words exactly as he wrote them. "To my family, who counted my breaths for 40 years, and never once carried me when I fell, I leave the lesson of this day. To the world that measured me by what I owned, I leave my answer." He turned the page. "The entirety of my estate, my shares in Adeyemi Holdings, my properties in Lagos, Abuja, and abroad my accounts and the controlling interest in all companies bearing my name. I leave wholly and without condition to Keneilwe, the woman who pulled me from a gutter when I had nothing she could want, and who fed me with the last of her own." For one heartbeat the room did not move. And then it erupted. The nephew was on his feet shouting. A woman wailed that it was witchcraft. Voices collided demanding the will be challenged, screaming that the old man had been senile, that the slum woman had bewitched him, that no court in Nigeria would allow it. Barrister Okonjo let the storm break over him, then lifted a single hand. "The chairman foresaw every word you are now saying," he said, "which is why the will is accompanied by 3 independent medical certifications of his soundness of mind, recorded over the past year, and by a sworn video statement which you may all watch, in which he names each of you and predicts almost exactly the things you are shouting now." He set down the page. "It is airtight. It will hold. Madame Keneilwe is as of this moment the sole heir of the Adeyemi fortune, and the principal shareholder of this company." And then the gray men of the board, the ones who actually held the power, did the thing that ended all argument. As one, they rose. They turned toward the thin woman in the plain black dress sitting in the great chair, and they bowed. "Madam Chairman," said the eldest among them, "we are at your service." Keneilwe sat very still in a sea of bowed heads, her hand pressed over her stubborn heart, and understood at last what the old man had meant by every riddle he had ever spoken. She did not feel triumph. She felt the strange hollow grief of a woman who would have given it all back for one more evening of feeding yam to her friend at the end of a dead-end road. The news left that boardroom faster than the people in it. By afternoon it was on the blogs and the markets, in every WhatsApp group in Lagos. The slum widow who inherited Adeyemi Holdings. the sick woman thrown out by her husband 3 days before she became a billionaire. The story spread like Harmattan fire. In Surulere, Emeka Okafor was choosing fabric for his introduction to Adiza's family when his phone began to ring and ring and ring. Friends. The men from the beer parlor. His mother screaming so loudly he had to hold the phone from his ear. He could not make sense of the words at first. Adeyemi, Keneilwe, billionaire, sole heir. He sat down slowly on a roll of lace. "No," he said. "No. The old beggar. The one she wasted our rice on, that was—" His voice failed. The brown folder. The paper he had pressed her to sign in peace. The Ghana must-go bag. He had handed her the pen 3 days before a fortune fell from the sky into the hands he had emptied. "No," he said again, but the city outside his window was already saying yes and laughing. And Daisy, when she heard, did a curious thing. She did not gloat that she had won the man. She went very pale and reached for her own phone with shaking fingers and began urgently to call her father, the great investor, the man with property on the island, because Daisy knew a secret of her own. She knew exactly how much that property was mortgaged for, and how little time her family had left before the banks came, and how badly, how very badly, they had been counting on a wealthy son-in-law to save them. She had thrown her whole future behind a man who it turned out had thrown his away first. A man who builds his house on another man's wealth learns very quickly how borrowed the ground beneath him was. Within a week, the careful structure of Emeka's new life began to fall not all at once, but the way a wall falls one loosened block pulling the next. It started with Adiza's family. The introduction that was to have launched Emeka into the world of property and serious people quietly evaporated. There were no more invitations, no more warm calls from her father. When Emeka finally drove to their compound on the island expecting the grand house he had been promised, he found instead a gate with a court notice pasted to it and a security man who had not been paid in 2 months. The great investor, it turned out, had been a drowning man dressed in fine clothes, and the property everyone whispered about belonged in truth to the banks. Adiza's family had been searching for a rich husband to throw over the side of their sinking ship, and they had believed, as Emeka had wanted everyone to believe, that he was a man with prospects. Now there were no prospects on either side. 2 poor people had each mistaken the other for a lifeboat. Adiza did not even grant him the dignity of a quarrel. She simply stopped answering. When at last she sent a message, it was 3 cold lines that things between them had run their natural course, that she wished him well, that she had met someone whose situation was clearer. She had already moved on to circle a new man rumored to have oil money gold at her ears, her smile fixed and bright as ever. She had spent Keneilwe's marriage like loose change and walked away whistling. Emeka's standing went next. In Lagos, reputation is a currency, and his had collapsed faster than the naira. The men in the beer parlor who had drunk his beer now drank elsewhere, and when they spoke his name it was to tell the story, the one the whole city was telling, of the fool who divorced a billionaire to save the cost of her medicine. He became a kind of warning, a thing mothers said to sons. Be careful how you treat people. Remember Emeka. His small electronics business, which had always limped, now failed entirely because no one wished to buy from a man who had become a joke, and because the landlord of the shop, hearing the story, found in it a fine excuse to put him out and let the space to someone luckier. Mama Nkechi fared no better, and in some ways worse, because she had so loudly enjoyed the cruelty. The same relatives who had laughed with her at the family gathering in Umuocha now arrived at her door, not to comfort her, but to scold. Did you not drive the girl out? Did you not call her a patient, a hole with no bottom? Did you not pack her things in a Ghana must-go bag with your own hands? Her sisters reminded her of every word. Her brother, who had once admired her sharp tongue, now told her plainly that she had thrown away the family's fortune with her pride, and that God did not love a proud woman. The respect she had spent her whole life demanding curdled into something else. When she walked through the village now, people did not bow. They whispered, and some of them laughed behind their hands the way she had laughed at Keneilwe, and the old woman discovered that mockery tastes very different when you are the one being served. And so one by one they began the long, bitter walk back. Mama Nkechi came first by Danfo to the gates of the Lekki estate, the very house Keneilwe now lived in. She who had called the girl a patient stood at the gate for an hour in the sun, sweating through her good wrapper, sending message after message through the guards. "Madam wishes to see you. Your mother-in-law is here. She has traveled far." When at last word came back, it was gentle and final. "Madam sends her greetings and prays God's peace over you, but she is not receiving family today." Mama Nkechi rode home in silence, and for the first time in her life found she had nothing sharp to say. Auntie Ifeoma came too, but Auntie Ifeoma came differently, and that difference would matter later. Through it all, Keneilwe did none of the things the watching city expected. She did not give interviews to mock the people who had wronged her. She did not buy a billboard or throw a party. She grieved her friend quietly, learned the shape of her new life slowly, and spent long hours with Mr. Bello and Barrister Okonjo, learning how a fortune is held and how it can be used. When the blogs begged her for the story of revenge, she gave them only one line which they printed everywhere. "I will not become what hurt me." But she was not made of stone, and the days were not all peace. There were nights she sat in the great pale house and wept for the old man, and for the 7 years of yellow paint, and for the simple, terrible truth that the man she had once loved had weighed her life against a sum of money and found her worth less. Wealth, she was learning, did not undo a wound. It only changed the room you bled in. It was on such a night late, with the rain finally deciding to fall over Lekki, that the guard buzzed the house. "Madam," the man said, uncertain, "there is someone at the gate. He says he is your husband. He says his name is Emeka Okafor. He is on his knees, madam, in the rain. He says he will not leave until you see him." Keneilwe sat very still in a chair that cost more than her old flat. Through the tall window she could just make out the gate, and the small soaked figure kneeling before it in the downpour, the proud man who had handed her a folder and a broken bag and told her to go in peace. The rain ran off him. He did not move. For a long moment she said nothing, and the only sound was the water on the glass. "Madam," the guard pressed gently, "what should I tell him?" Keneilwe rose and drew her wrapper around her shoulders and looked at the kneeling shape of her past, with an expression that was neither anger nor triumph, but something quieter and far harder to bear. "Open the gate," she said. "Let him in. It is time he and I finished the conversation he started." They brought Emeka into the wide front room, dripping, shivering, leaving dark prints on the pale marble. A servant offered him a towel, and he took it without seeming to feel it, his eyes fixed on Keneilwe as she came down the curved stair in no hurry at all. She had imagined this man humbled 100 times in her bitter hours. The reality gave her none of the satisfaction she had braced for. He only looked smaller and wet and afraid. "Keneilwe," he said, and his voice broke on the second syllable. He came forward and would have knelt again on the marble had she not stopped him with a single raised hand. "Sit, Emeka," she said. "Kneeling is not a conversation. Sit and say what you came to say, and then we will both have peace." He sat on the edge of a chair, too fine for him, the towel twisting in his hands. "I was wrong," he said. "I was a fool. I let my mother poison me. I let that woman Adiza blind me. I let money speak louder than my own wife." The words came in a flood now, the speech of a man who had rehearsed it in the rain. "But it was never truly in my heart, you must believe me. I was confused. I was under pressure, the bills, the bills," Keneilwe repeated softly, and something in the gentleness of it silenced him more completely than a shout. "Yes. Let us talk about the bills. Do you remember Emeka, the night my heart raced so badly that Mama Grace had to carry me to the hospital in a stranger's taxi? You were not home. You were with a daisy. Do you remember the morning I came back with the hospital band still on my wrist, too weak to climb the stairs, and found a brown folder waiting for me on the table where my herbs used to dry?" He bowed his head. "I remember. You did not ask me how I was. You did not look at my wrist. You handed me a pen, and your mother handed me a broken bag, and you told me to go in peace." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "You weighed my life, Emeka. You sat at the table I painted, and you did your arithmetic, and you decided a sick wife was a cost you could cut. That is what you came here tonight to apologize for. Not for being confused, for deciding that a human being was a debt." The room was very quiet. Emeka's shoulders shook. "Take me back," he whispered. "Please. I will spend my whole life making it right. I will serve you. I will—" "No," Keneilwe said. "Not cruelly, the way one closes a door against the cold. No, Emeka, I forgive you, because I will not carry your weight in my chest for the rest of my days, and because the old man who left me all of this taught me that a heart full of poison cannot also hold peace. So I forgive you. But forgiveness is not a marriage. I will not become your wife again, and I will not become your purse." She paused. "You divorced me to save money. You succeeded. You are free of me exactly as you wished. Go and live free." "And what am I to do?" he said, desperate now, the truth of his ruin pressing in. "I have nothing. No business, no name. The whole city laughs at me." For the first time, Keneilwe's voice softened with something close to pity. "Work," she said. "Begin again as I had to. Earn an honest name. And Emeka, one day when a person crosses your path who can do nothing for you, who has nothing you want, who's only sick and tired and in need, be kind to them. Not because it will profit you, because the day will come for every one of us when we are the one in the gutter, and we will pray that someone walks past us the way you did not walk past but stopped." She nodded to the servant. "See him out, give him an umbrella, the rain is heavy." And that was how the proud man who had thrown her away left the great house, not punished by her hand, but by his own, with an umbrella he had not deserved, held over his bowed head. If Emeka was the wound, Auntie Ifeoma was the beginning of the healing. She had come to the gate too in the days after the will, but she had not begged for money, and she had not pretended she was blameless. She had asked the guards to deliver a single folded note, and the note had said only this: "I sat in that room in Umuocha and said nothing while they shamed you. My silence was its own cruelty. I do not come for your fortune. I come only to say I am ashamed, and that you were always better than all of us, and I was too afraid to say so. You owe me nothing. I simply needed you to know." Keneilwe had read it 3 times. Then she had sent for her. The 2 women sat together in the garden the next morning, and Auntie Ifeoma wept the honest tears of someone who has finally set down a burden of guilt, and Keneilwe took her hand, the same hand that had once trembled and folded in that village parlor. "You were afraid," Keneilwe said. "I know fear. Fear is not the same as wickedness. The wicked enjoyed it. You only survived it." She smiled. "Come. There is work I am building, and I will need people around me who know the difference between what a person owns and what a person gives. You knew it even when you were too frightened to say so. I have not forgotten." In those same weeks, Keneilwe finally did the thing the old money had been meant for from the start. She flew across the sea to the hospital whose name she had memorized but never dared speak aloud, and the surgeons opened her chest and quieted her stubborn heart and made it strong. She woke in a clean white room with the sun coming through her hand, drifting up out of old habit to press against the scar, and felt for the first time in years a heartbeat that did not flutter like a trapped bird. She wept then not from grief, but because a body that has been afraid for a long time does not know at first what to do with peace. She came home strong, and it was that homecoming, healthy and whole, stepping off the plane into a crowd of cameras the blogs had summoned, that set the stage for the one thing still unfinished. Because Mr. Bello met her at the airport with news. The board of Adeyemi Holdings was holding a public memorial gala for the late chairman, a grand event the whole of moneyed Lagos invited. And among the names on the guest list, secured long ago through old connections he no longer possessed, were two that made Keneilwe go very still, Mama Nkechi and Emeka. They were coming, not knowing she would be the one standing at the podium. The memorial gala for Chief Tunde Adeyemi was held in the grand ballroom of his own flagship hotel, beneath chandeliers that scattered light like falling coins. Moneyed Lagos came in its finest, the agbada stiff with embroidery, the gowns sweeping the marble, everyone curious to lay eyes at last on the slum widow who had inherited an empire. They expected perhaps a fragile woman overwhelmed by a world too large for her. What they saw was Keneilwe. She wore deep emerald simple and regal, her surgery scar hidden beneath the high neck, her head unbowed. She moved through the room with the quiet certainty of a woman who no longer needed anyone's permission to exist. And when she took the podium beneath the great portrait of the old man, the entire ballroom fell silent the way that boardroom had once fallen silent, waiting. Near the back, seated where the lesser guests were placed, were Mama Nkechi and Emeka. They had come on an old, half-forgotten invitation, hoping perhaps to be seen among important people to borrow back a little of the standing they had lost. They had not known. When Keneilwe stepped into the light and the room hushed her name, Mama Nkechi's face drained gray, and Emeka sank low in his chair, as though he might fold himself out of existence. Keneilwe began to speak, and she did not speak of revenge. "I knew this man," she said, "when the world knew him as Baba Tunde, a poor old beggar at the end of a dead-end street in Surulere. People threw stones at his door. Grown men stepped around him as though poverty were contagious. And I want to tell you the truth tonight because he would have wanted the truth. I did not feed him because I knew he was rich. I did not know. I fed him because he was hungry, and because hunger does not knock before it enters any of our houses." Her eyes moved unhurried across the sea of faces and rested for just a moment on the two gray figures at the back. "He taught me that the world measures us by what we own, but heaven measures us by what we give. I stand here tonight not because I was clever, not because I schemed, but because on the worst days of my life, when I myself had almost nothing, I chose to give the little I had. That is the only secret. There is no other." She let the silence hold. Then she announced the thing she had been building. The entire principal fortune of Chief Tunde Adeyemi, she said, would seed a foundation in his name. It would build hospitals where the poor could be treated for free, the kind of treatment she herself had once memorized the name of and never dared dream of affording. It would feed the old and the forgotten at the ends of 1,000 roads, exactly as he had asked of her with his final breath. He spent his life believing no one would love him for himself. She said, her voice thick now. Let his death prove him wrong 1,000 times over in every life it saves. The ballroom rose to its feet, and the applause broke over her like rain after a long drought. In the days and weeks that followed, the accounts came due for everyone not by Keneilwe's hand, but by the simple public machinery of consequence. A daisy, whose family's debts the banks had finally come to collect, found the doors of moneyed Lagos closed to her at last. The oil money man she had been circling heard her story and wanted no part of a woman known for trading hearts like loose change, and she drifted to the city's edges, still beautiful, still searching, still empty-handed. Mama Nkechi returned to Umuocha, to a village that no longer feared her tongue. The relatives who had once laughed alongside her now used her as the cautionary tale and pride, having no one left to impress, simply curdled into a bitter, lonely old age. And Emeka took Keneilwe's parting advice in the end because he had nothing else left to take. He found honest work low and hard loading goods at a depot, and the city slowly stopped telling his story because it had grown tired of it, and somewhere in the long anonymous years of his labor there was perhaps the faint beginning of a man learning what it costs to step over someone in the gutter. Auntie Ifeoma did not curdle and did not fall. Keneilwe placed her over the new foundation's outreach, the work of finding the forgotten, and the once frightened woman discovered a courage in service that fear had never let her find at her mother's table. She flourished. The difference between her and the others was the difference the old man had spent his whole life searching for. She had known, even when silent, what a person was truly worth. As for Keneilwe, the years were kind to her at last. The foundation grew. The first hospital opened in Surulere, a clean, bright building of glass and care raised on the very street where an old man had once lain ignored in a gutter, and over its doors she had carved the only epitaph he would have wanted. Heaven measures us by what we give. Children no longer threw stones at that dead end. They were born there now, in safe hands, for free. And love, when it came quietly, as the best things did. It was the doctor who had treated her stubborn heart across the sea, a gentle, unhurried man named Dr. Sawand, who had never once asked what she owned, who had loved her thin and frightened before he ever knew she was anything more than a poor woman with a failing heart. They married in a small ceremony, no convoy of black SUVs, no glittering strangers, only the people who had loved her when she had nothing, with Mama Grace from the provisions stall weeping happily in the front row. On the evening of her wedding, Keneilwe slipped away for a moment from the celebration and stood alone at a window looking out over the lights of the city that had once watched her carry a broken bag down a wet street. She pressed her hand, as she always would, over the strong, steady beat of her healed heart. "You were right, Baba," she whispered to the night. "I never sat on a broken bag at the side of any road again." She smiled through her tears. "Rest now. I am feeding the poor ones. There are so many, and I will not stop."